Something snapped in Washington this week, and you could hear it all the way from Minnesota. When arrests get announced before excuses, power shifts fast. Pam Bondi walked to the podium, named fraud, and said charges. Funding froze hours later. That sequence matters. It tells you enforcement replaced theater. And suddenly Ilhan Omar's outrage tour began. Cameras on, voice raised, blame everywhere except where it belongs. Here is the reality people feel in their wallets. FBI director tweeted, "To date, the FBI dismantled a $250 million fraud scheme that stole federal food aid meant for vulnerable children during COVID. The investigation exposed sham vendors, shell companies, and large-scale money laundering tied to the Feeding Our Future network. Taxpayer money vanished for years. Warnings piled up. Leadership stayed comfortable. Now consequences arrived and the tantrum started. Stay with me. This exposure explains it."
The U.S. Justice Department says it has charged 98 people in a sweeping fraud investigation centered in Minnesota, with more cases expected. Officials say more than 60 of those charged have already pleaded guilty or been convicted, signaling rapid progress in the probe. The department announced the charges on social media, describing the case as a wide-ranging effort to protect federal programs. Earlier, Attorney General Pam Bondi said 85 of the individuals charged so far are of Somali descent. Bondi also posted online praising recent arrests connected to the Minnesota fraud investigation. FBI Director Kash Patel said significant progress has been made against a large-scale fraud operation. Patel said the scheme exploited federal food aid programs intended for children during the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the FBI, investigators dismantled what they describe as a $250 million food aid fraud scheme.
This is where everything changes. Those numbers matter. 98 people charged, dozens already convicted. That tells you speed, coordination, and certainty. Federal cases move slow when evidence feels thin. This one moved fast because the trail was obvious. Money left programs meant for children and flowed into private hands through organized schemes. When prosecutors move like this, they already know where the records lead. Here is what should hit home for every viewer. This fraud did serious damage without breaking windows or making headlines for years. It happened quietly through paperwork, approvals, reimbursements, and trust. Families believed help was reaching kids. Taxpayers believed oversight existed. That belief carried weight until evidence shattered it. Once the arrests landed, the story shifted from theory to consequences. Pay attention to the sequence. Federal agencies stepped in after years of state-level delay. The FBI, DHS, and DOJ moved together. Door knocks replaced meetings. Charges replaced warnings. That difference explains why this feels sudden to people inside Minnesota leadership. For federal investigators, this moment arrived late. They follow patterns, bank records, shell accounts, and repeated behavior. When enough dots connect, enforcement follows fast. This clip also explains why emotions exploded afterward. When accountability arrives, defenses crumble. People who benefited from silence feel exposed. That is when anger turns loud. That reaction tells you more than any press statement. Accountability disrupts comfort. It changes incentives. It forces answers. And think about the scale again. This was food aid for children during a crisis. That detail carries weight. Every dollar diverted carried a human cost. Parents trusted systems. Communities relied on them. Fraud drains more than money. It drains faith. Once faith erodes, rebuilding it takes action, transparency, and enforcement people can see. This is also why independent reporting mattered. Attention forced movement. Public pressure accelerated federal response. That pattern keeps repeating across the country. Exposure leads, enforcement follows, silence protects nobody. So when people ask why this story feels different, here is the reason. Charges came first. Convictions followed quickly. Funding froze, oversight hardened. That combination signals seriousness. This investigation continues expanding. More records get pulled, more names surface, more decisions face review. Stay focused on the facts. Organized fraud met federal force. Accountability arrived with speed. And that changes everything moving forward.
So the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services pulled the claims data for these 14 programs dating back to 2018. And those 14 programs in Minnesota have cost $18 billion since 2018 and more than $3.5 billion in 2024 alone. So that's a sense of the magnitude of the problem. These are the 14 Medicaid programs, which is just a part of Medicaid, these waivered services that have been flagged as having issues with program integrity and fraud. Now, I'm sure everyone is wondering how much of this $18 billion was fraud. That's It's not the $1 million question, that's the $18 billion question. The answer is far too much, and the task ahead of all of us is not only figuring out how much of that money was fraud, because we know a significant amount was, but figuring out how to put an end to the fraud in our state and get control of it.
Those numbers land heavy because they expose something deeper than one investigation. $18 billion moved through programs already flagged for risk. $3.5 billion in a single year. That scale does something dangerous to a system. It creates comfort. It teaches people that money keeps flowing even when controls fail. And once that lesson sets in, abuse grows fast. Here is my take. Oversight failed long before arrests arrived. Reports existed. Data existed. Red flags flashed for years. Yet payments kept clearing. That means accountability lived on paper while reality moved unchecked. When leaders speak about complexity, remember this truth. Complexity never explains repeated payouts tied to the same patterns. Systems track behavior. People choose whether to act on it. What bothers people watching this story unfold goes beyond fraud. It is the gap between warnings and action. When billions cycle through programs with known vulnerabilities, someone signs off every time. That approval culture becomes its own problem. It rewards silence. It punishes scrutiny. And eventually, federal intervention becomes inevitable. This also explains why trust feels so fragile right now. Every day people deal with audits over small mistakes, families lose benefits over paperwork errors. Meanwhile, massive flows move without interruption. That contrast creates anger. People see rules applied differently depending on scale and influence. Once that belief spreads, confidence erodes fast. I also want to say this clearly. Programs designed to help vulnerable families matter. They deserve protection. Fraud steals more than dollars. It steals legitimacy from systems meant to serve real needs. When integrity collapses, future funding faces skepticism, and innocent recipients pay the price. The conversation now shifts to leadership. Responsibility lives at the top. Oversight exists for a reason. When warnings stack up across years, accountability follows leadership decisions. That reality explains why this story keeps widening. Investigators chase patterns, approvals, and delays. They ask who knew what and when action stalled. What happens next matters nationally. Other states watch closely. Agencies reassess exposure. Compliance tightens. Funding decisions grow sharper. That ripple effect restores balance when enforcement stays visible. Here is the takeaway. This moment forces a reset. Transparency replaces comfort, consequences replace excuses, and voters decide whether accountability continues or fades. Momentum exists right now. Whether it holds depends on follow-through. Keep watching. Pressure works when people stay engaged.
Questions popping up about what she knew and when about a massive COVID fraud scheme in her district. Talking billions, could be billions, at least $1 billion, could go higher. Mike Tobin's got more on that now. Mike, good morning to you. What do you have?
Well, good morning, Bill. And as you mentioned, Minnesota Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has been in the crosshairs. She made the statement that there were insufficient guardrails to defrauded programs like Feed the Future. Speaking on Face the Nation, she defended against the fact that all but a handful of the suspects and convicts in this case are from Minnesota's Somali community.
This also has an impact on Somalis because we are also taxpayers in Minnesota. We also could have benefited from the program and the money that was stolen. And so it's been really frustrating for people to not acknowledge the fact that we're also as Minnesotans, as taxpayers.
Now let's talk directly about Ilhan Omar, because the spotlight landed on her for a reason. This fraud case unfolded inside her district. It involved programs she publicly supported. And when the numbers exploded into the billions, people started asking the most basic accountability question. What did she know, and when did she know it? Her response matters here. Instead of addressing timelines, oversight failures, or enforcement gaps, the conversation shifted toward frustration, identity, and optics. That move changes the focus. Voters want clarity about governance. They want to hear how safeguards failed and why action lagged for years. Emotional framing avoids those answers. Ilhan Omar acknowledged guardrails were weak. That admission carries weight. Weak guardrails mean risk was visible. Risk without intervention becomes responsibility. Members of Congress operate with access ordinary citizens never get. Briefings, agency contacts, legislative oversight tools all exist for moments like this. When fraud reaches this scale, passive awareness stops being neutral. Another issue stands out. Public appearances tied to figures later convicted created optics problems that leadership cannot ignore. Optics alone do not prove wrongdoing, yet they amplify concern when oversight collapses nearby. In politics, perception follows proximity. That reality feels uncomfortable, though it exists for a reason. What people are reacting to now is contrast. Federal agencies moved fast once evidence stacked up. Arrests followed, convictions followed. Meanwhile, years passed locally with payments flowing. That gap fuels skepticism. When enforcement arrives only after national exposure, trust erodes. Ilhan Omar now faces scrutiny that comes with power. That scrutiny does not equal guilt. It equals responsibility. Leadership during crisis gets judged by decisions, timing, and response. Defensive posture weakens confidence. Direct answers strengthen it. This moment forces a choice. Address oversight failures head-on or frame criticism as unfair targeting. One path restores credibility, the other deepens doubt. Voters watch which route leaders take under pressure. This story continues expanding because accountability rarely stops at arrests. It follows decisions, delays, and silence. Ilhan Omar stands inside that process now, whether she welcomes it or not. How she responds going forward will shape how this chapter gets remembered. This moment draws a hard line between accountability and avoidance. Arrests changed the conversation. Numbers removed excuses. Leadership now faces questions that cannot be deflected. Voters decide what comes next. Watch actions, timing, and answers closely. This story keeps moving, and credibility moves with it.